You know how it is when you're young and stupid and think a road trip can fix everything. That was us in December 2006. Four friends crammed into my old Toyota 4Runner, heading up into the mountains just to get away. So anyway, we had no real plan, just a case of beer and a paper map because our phones died. I mean, who cared? We were free. We got lost, of course, winding through those dark pine forests until we stumbled on it, an old hunting cabin, half hidden in the trees. I didn't know it then, but the warmth we craved was already starting to poison us. We cheered when we saw it. A real log cabin, kind of tilting but still solid, with a rusted chimney poking through the snow. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, that clean, cold scent that makes you feel alive. We grabbed our gear and ran to the door, laughing like kids. Travis pushed it open with his shoulder. It creaked and gave way. Inside, it was pitch black and somehow even colder than outside. Our breath turned to thick clouds. Someone flicked a lighter and we saw a dusty table, a couple of bunks, and that big cast iron stove in the corner, waiting. Someone joked about the musty smell, but we all just shrugged. Old cabin, right? What did you expect? We dropped our bags, already arguing about who got which bunk, and started gathering old newspapers and dry-looking logs. We were so focused on getting warm that we didn't notice how quiet the forest had become. But that cold inside was like a living thing, settling into your bones the second you stopped moving. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter, and told myself the fire would fix everything. So the cabin was basically one room. You had the table in the middle, two wooden bunks against the wall, and that stove, old and heavy, but it looked solid. We found a pile of logs in the corner that seemed dry enough. I guess we were just excited to get the fire going. Travis, he was always the tough one, balled up some newspaper and started stacking kindling, and then he lit it. For a minute, nothing. Then you heard that crack of the wood catching, and the warmth started pushing back the cold. It felt like victory. But yeah, someone's phone went off. That snow, hey-oh ringtone, you know the one. And we all laughed. Mike cracked open a Coors Banquet and took a swig, passing it around. We were all in a good mood. And then Mike pointed at the ceiling. A thin layer of smoke was just hanging there, not going up the chimney. It didn't smell right either. Not like campfire. Something sour, like old metal or chemicals. Travis waved it off. He said the damper was probably a little stuck, that once the fire got hot enough, the draft would pull it all up. Just dust burning off, he said. I guess I wanted to believe him. We all did. So anyway, to keep the warmth in, we shut the door tight and pushed the old plastic sheeting against the window frame. Travis wedged a chair under the doorknob to seal it. I remember thinking, now we're really cozy. And I mean, the fire was crackling, the room was finally warming up, and we all settled into our spots. But that sour smell, it didn't go away. It just kind of mixed with the wood smoke, and we stopped noticing it. As I sat there laughing and passing the beer, I glanced up at the smoke near the rafters. It was moving, but barely, like a slow, lazy fog. And then Travis shut the door tight, sealing us in with it. I don't know exactly when things started to shift. Maybe an hour had passed. You know how time gets when you're just sitting around. But I remember looking up and realizing how quiet it had gotten. The fire wasn't popping anymore. The lanterns we lit were flickering, kind of dim, and there was this heavy silence, like the air itself was pressing down on us. I thought about the Garmin GPS we left in the 4Runner, but the idea of going outside felt like a million miles away. I had this headache building right behind my eyes. At first I figured it was just from the drive, or maybe the altitude. You know, mountain sickness. I mean, we were pretty high up. I even said that out loud, something like, "Man, I feel like I got a hangover with no drinks." I expected a laugh, but nobody said anything. Like at all. Liza had curled up on one of the bunks earlier. She looked like she was just napping, but she was way too still. I mean, she didn't move at all. Mike was sitting at the table, rubbing his temples and staring at that paper map like he forgot how to read. And Travis, he was still by the stove, but he wasn't feeding it. He just stared at the door, his eyes kind of empty. I reached for my beer, and my hand felt slow, like moving through water. There was this weird metallic taste in my mouth, like I'd been sucking on coins. I tried to take a sip, but my fingers just let go. The can hit the floor and beer spilled all over the boards. I just watched it spread, a dark puddle in the lantern light, and I didn't even try to pick it up. That's when, like, a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered something was wrong, but I couldn't make myself care. I just sat there, staring at the puddle, listening to the silence. I mean, the headache was something else by then. It started as a dull ache, but it grew into this iron band squeezing my skull. And the smell, that sweet, rotten smell, like something dead and sugary, it was everywhere. I remember looking at my red Columbia jacket and thinking I should take it off because I was sweating, but my fingers couldn't work the zipper. They just fumbled, like they belonged to someone else. And then I tried to stand up. My legs felt like they were full of wet sand. I managed to get halfway up before my knee buckled, and I hit the floor with a thud that I felt more than heard. I cut my knee open on something sharp, blood soaking through my jeans, but I felt no pain, nothing, just that crushing pressure in my temples. Liza was still on the bunk. I called her name. Nothing. I shook her shoulder, hard. She didn't react, like at all. Her face was slack, her breathing so shallow I couldn't see her chest move. I thought maybe she ate something bad on the drive up. Yeah, that was it. Food poisoning. That made sense. And then Mike turned to me. He had blood trickling from his nose, a thin dark line reaching his lip, and he just stared at it on his fingers and said, "Oh, look." Like it was interesting. Like it wasn't his own body failing. He made no move to wipe it away. I remember thinking I should help him, but the thought just floated there, and my body didn't move. I heard a hissing sound from the stove. The fire was almost dead, just a few orange embers glowing behind the grate. And I knew, somewhere deep in my foggy brain, that something was very wrong with the air in that room. But my head was too heavy, and the floor felt almost comfortable. I told myself I just needed to close my eyes, just for a second. And then Travis moved. He was still by the stove, closest to the heat, and I saw his hand grip the chair. He mumbled something about airing the place out, his voice thick and slow. So anyway, he got to his feet, wobbling like a newborn deer. He took one step, then another, and then he reached for the door frame, his fingers clawing at the wood. That's when he fell. I mean, I've heard people fall before, but this was different. This was a deep, heavy thud, like a sack of sand being dropped. He didn't try to catch himself. He just collapsed, pulling down a coat rack, his body hitting the floor with a finality that shook the whole cabin. His Nokia phone slipped from his chest pocket and skidded across the boards, the screen cracking. I stared at him. His eyes were half open, his mouth slack, and from his throat came this sound, a wet, rasping wheeze, like air being forced through a crushed straw. I thought, maybe he just had too much to drink earlier. Tequila at the gas station. Yeah, that was it. He just passed out. But the wheezing didn't stop. It was the only sound in the room besides the hissing stove, and the window, I noticed, was completely fogged up from the inside, like a bathroom mirror after a hot shower. My own breath felt shallow, my chest barely moving. I looked at Travis, at the pool of drool forming by his mouth, and something inside me snapped. This wasn't sleep. This wasn't drunk. This was death, slowly, quietly filling the room. And I was next. I guess survival is just instinct, because I didn't think. I just moved. I tried to crawl like a wounded animal, dragging my useless legs across the floor. My hand came down on the pieces of Travis's shattered phone, the sharp plastic cutting into my palm. I didn't feel it. I mean, I saw the blood, but it didn't register. The door. I just had to reach the door. But it opened inward, and Travis was lying right in front of it, a dead weight. I told myself the door was just stuck, the wood swollen from the heat. Normal thing. Normal. I pulled myself over his body, my face inches from his. His eyes were still open, but they didn't see me. I reached up and fumbled with the lock. My fingers slipped. Twice. 3 times. And then it clicked open. I pushed. The door didn't move. I pushed harder, panic flaring in my chest. Still nothing. It was sealed tight. I guess I started screaming then, but no sound came out. I lay on my back, my legs tangled with Travis's, and I kicked, both feet against the door. Once, twice. I heard a crack, a sharp snap of wood splintering near the lock, and then a third kick, and the door burst outward. A rush of air hit me, so cold it felt like a blade slicing into my lungs. I gasped, choking on it, but it was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. I dragged myself over the threshold into the snow, leaving Travis behind. The cold bit my face, my hands, but I just lay there, staring up at the stars, breathing. Just breathing. Beep, beep, beep. That was the first thing I heard when I came back. A steady electronic beeping. I smelled antiseptic, that sharp, clean hospital smell that clings to everything. Green curtain hung around my bed, and I could see my mom sitting in a plastic chair, her face pale and wet with tears. The doctor came in. He spoke slowly, gently, like I was a child. Carbon monoxide poisoning, he said. The stove was faulty. Incomplete combustion filled the room with gas. You were lucky, he said. You were still breathing when rescue found you. Travis, Mike, Liza, I cut him off. I know, I said. My voice was raspy, hollow. He told me I pulled them all out onto the snow before I collapsed. Called it heroic. Said I tried to save them. But I just stared at my bandaged hands. I don't remember doing any of that. I only remember one thing. When I crawled outside and took that first breath of frozen air, I turned my head, and I looked back through the black, broken doorway into the cabin. Something moved inside. A shadow. Slow. Shuffling. Like someone trying to stand. They told me it was just the trauma. PTSD. My brain playing tricks to protect itself. I mean, that's what I tell myself too. But yeah, I know that's a lie. Because even now in my apartment, when I try to sleep, I hear them. Not the beeping of a machine, not the hissing of gas. Footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps. They're walking toward a door that I kicked open, a door I can never close again. And I know one night those footsteps won't stop at the doorway. They'll come inside. So anyway, Elena and I, we were what you'd call weekend warriors. Not hardcore backpackers, but we knew our way around a trail map. This was back in 2006. We had a dark green Ford Explorer Sport Track, and I remember Elena had just bought a new Camelback hydration pack, the kind with the big blue mouthpiece. We drove out to Gifford Pinchot National Forest, a place we'd been a dozen times before. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, that clean, wet forest smell, It was a perfect Saturday morning. We parked at the trailhead, got our gear, and Elena pointed to a fresh trail marker on a tree, a powder blue arrow, way brighter than the faded red ones we usually saw. I joked that the Rangers finally got a budget for new paint. I mean, it looked brand new. I didn't know then that the fresh paint on that sign would still be wet when we finally realized we weren't coming back the same way. We started walking. The trail was familiar, soft underfoot, and we talked about work, normal stuff. I remember the sun coming through the trees, making those little spotlights on the moss. I guess we walked for about 20 minutes before I noticed that there were a lot of these blue arrows, like every 100 feet. I thought maybe the Forest Service changed their marking policy, make it more tourist-friendly. Elena said it was nice actually, felt guided. She ran her finger near one, didn't touch it, but said it looked wet. I just laughed. They probably painted it this morning, I said. So we kept going deeper, following that powder blue further into the trees. The forest got thicker, the light dimmer. The only sounds were our footsteps and the pine smell. Stronger now, almost sticky. I didn't think anything of it. The whole thing felt like a normal hike, just a little more marked. Not yet. You know, after about an hour of walking, you start to feel like something's off. It's not a big thing, just a little shift in your gut. We were still following those blue arrows, but they were way too frequent. I mean, you couldn't walk 30 seconds without seeing one. I remember checking my Garmin Forerunner 205, the GPS watch I just bought. The signal was jumping all over the place like we were in a tunnel. I figured it was just the thick canopy. I guess I told Elaine it was fine. She didn't say much at first, but I could tell she was scanning the trees more than the trail. The forest had gotten quieter, you know. The only thing I could hear was this whisper of wind in the pines, really faint. And there was a smell, not just pine, but something oily behind it, like fresh paint. Then Elena stopped dead. She pointed a tree with one of the arrows. Right next to the bright blue mark, there was a smudge. I got closer and saw it clearly, a fingerprint in the paint, like someone had pressed their thumb right into it while it was still wet. Elena whispered that it wasn't dry yet. I remember saying, maybe the ranger didn't wear gloves this morning. I mean, that happens, right? It's just a fingerprint. But her face was pale. She said we should turn back. I stared at that print. The ridges were so sharp, it looked fresh, really fresh. I had this flash of a person standing right there, painting the arrow and then just watching us. But I pushed that down. I said we were fine, we just looped back. So we kept going, following the blue further into the dim light. The dim light made everything look bluish, and that oily smell settled in the back of my throat. I guess we were walking into something we didn't want to admit, but now every time I saw an arrow, I looked for fingerprints, and I started seeing them on almost everyone. And then the trees just stopped. One minute we were pushing through thick underbrush, the next we stumbled into this clearing. Right in the middle was a dark hole in the ground, covered by a rusted metal grate. A ventilation shaft for an old mine, I figured. The air tasted metallic, like sucking on a penny, and there was this constant rustle of dead leaves skittering across the grate. There was a blue arrow painted directly on the metal frame, pointing down into that black pit. And after that, nothing. No more arrows anywhere. The trail was a dead end. I walked around the clearing, scanning every tree. Nothing. The blue arrow by the shaft was the last one. It was like someone had drawn us a map that ended at a trap. I felt like an idiot. I'd led my wife to an abandoned mine shaft. Elena just stood there hugging her arms. She didn't have to say anything. I knew I'd messed up. Like we'd followed a false trail. Maybe we'd been following the wrong color the whole time. Probably veered off the main path miles back without noticing. That's what I told myself. Elena suggested we sit and eat the Subway sandwiches we packed that morning. She always thought food could fix a crisis. So we sat on a fallen log, unwrapping those cold meatball subs, and I tried to joke. I pulled out my Sony ICD P320 voice recorder I used for notes. I pressed record and said, "This is Victor, signing off from the surface of the earth. We've descended into a mine shaft, never to be seen again. Tell our cats we love them." I meant it as a joke, to break the tension, but Elena didn't laugh. She stared at that grate. I remember the rustle of leaves sounded louder then, like something was moving just under the metal. And from the shaft itself, there was this deep, empty hum, almost below hearing, and I realized my hand was shaking holding the recorder. The joke didn't feel funny anymore. It felt like I just documented our last known location. So we tried to backtrack, follow our own footprints out of that nightmare. But the ground back there, it was all pine needles and moss. Soft stuff. Our tracks just vanished after about 50 feet. We stood there, spinning around, looking for a blue arrow, a broken branch, anything. And the forest went dead silent, like someone hit a mute button. No wind, no rustle, just that sour smell of our own sweat soaking through our shirts. We started arguing. Elena said we should have turned back at the fingerprint. I told her I was just following the trail. But yeah, it was panic talking. I pulled out the Sony recorder again, thinking I'd dictate some landmarks. Get a clear head. I pressed play to test the speaker. Instead of my voice, there was this low, distant static coming from the tiny speaker. Like a seashell, like something breathing far away. I told myself it was just interference from the mineshaft, so I shut it off. Elena grabbed my arm. She pointed to a bush at waist height. There was a clump of hair caught on a twig. Short, blonde, maybe 3 strands. Neither of us had blonde hair. I said it was probably deer fur. You know how they rub against things. Just a deer. But Elena shook her head and plucked one strand. It was coarse, human. Her hand was shaking. Then she pulled me to a tree with a blue arrow. She whispered that the paint was still sticky. She'd barely touched it. I pressed my thumb next to the arrow. The paint smeared. Fresh. So fresh it hadn't even skinned over. Someone had been right here, marking this tree minutes ago. Not hours. Minutes. And that blonde hair, it wasn't old. The smell of paint hit me again, oily and sharp. I looked around the silent trees. We weren't backtracking anymore. We were being led. And the person leading us was still close. Close enough to touch the same bark we were staring at. But yeah, we couldn't see them. The light started to go. You know how it gets in the woods, that slow fade from green to gray. I began snapping branches, trying to mark a path that made sense. Every break sounded like a gunshot in that quiet. But then I heard a snap that didn't come from me. It came from our left, maybe 30 yards. A sharp crack of a twig under a foot. I froze. Elena's eyes went wide. We listened. For a second, nothing. Then footsteps. Soft, deliberate, moving through the underbrush, parallel to us. I mean, not crashing like an animal. Walking. A person. I grabbed Elena's hand and yelled out, thinking maybe it was another hiker or a ranger. My voice sounded thin and pathetic. The footsteps stopped. Then we saw it. A shadow between the trees. Short, human-shaped, just standing there, half hidden by a big pine. It didn't wave, didn't shout back. It just watched us for a long, slow breath. I yelled again, and the shadow turned and walked away. Not fast, just melted back into the gray. I ran to where it had been. There was a clear footprint in a patch of damp earth. Not mine, not Elena's. A running shoe, Adidas Supernova, the 2005 model with the wavy sole. I used to sell those at a sports store. I pointed it out, and Elena just stared. I told her it was probably some lost tourist who couldn't hear us. You know, maybe they were deaf or scared. I didn't believe it. The print was too fresh. The person had been standing there for a while, just watching us panic. We didn't follow the shadow. We didn't speak about it. We just stood back to back, in the middle of the darkening woods, listening to the silence fill up with that metallic taste of fear. The only thing we could do was wait for the dark to swallow us or for someone to find us. We stopped snapping branches. We stopped calling out. We just breathed. And then, after what felt like a lifetime, the dark exploded with light. Beams from heavy maglite flashlights cut through the trees. Voices, real voices, shouting our names. I yelled back until my throat cracked. Elena just dropped to her knees and cried. The smell of sweat and the metallic taste from the mine shaft was replaced by the sharp burn of carbon from the flashlights. It was the best smell in the world. Search and rescue surrounded us. Thick boots, orange vests. I tried to explain about the blue arrows, about the blonde hair, about the shadow that walked. The lead rescuer, an older guy with a gray mustache, just nodded slowly. But I saw how he glanced at his partner. That look people give when they think you're in shock. I guess they thought we just got turned around. Then one of them said real quiet that we were the 7th group this season. 7. All followed blue arrows into dead zones. The real trail markers, he said, are red. Always have been. Someone's been painting over them, redirecting people for months. A ranger with a Remington 700 slung over his shoulder circled the clearing, checking the perimeter. He came back shaking his head. No one there. No footprints leading away. Nothing. The place was clean. One of the paramedics wrapped a blanket around Elena. She pointed at her hair and mumbled something. The paramedic pulled her hand back and I saw it. Her fingertips were smudged with blue. There was a streak of paint, bright powder blue, snagged in the ends of her dark hair. Like someone had brushed a painted finger across her head while we stood in the dark. I looked at my own hands. Clean. I had no idea how it got on her, and I didn't want to know. The rescuers just shined their lights toward the trail and told us to walk. I didn't look back, but I could still smell that paint. They put us in a Super 8 motel that night. The room smelled like cheap coffee from the lobby and stale air freshener. I sat on the edge of the bed, and Elena was in the shower, scrubbing the blue out of her hair. The ranger had left a folder on the desk by accident, or maybe he didn't care. I flipped through it. Incident reports, statements from the other groups. They all said the same thing. Fresh blue arrows, a dead end, a shadow watching. Then I saw the detail that broke everything open. Every single one of those lost groups had airlifted out, not by the Forest Service, by a private helicopter. They all paid on the spot with credit cards. Some paid over $2,000. Someone had handed them a business card, stuck it on their windshield, or left it with a local motel clerk. The same pilot every time. So anyway, I pulled out the wallet from my wet jeans pocket. There was a card in there I didn't remember picking up. It was crumpled, but I could read the name. A private extraction service. The number was local, and that's when I understood. The figure in the woods wasn't hiding. It was waiting. Waiting for us to get exhausted and desperate. Waiting for us to reach a point where we'd pay anything, sign anything, just to see a set of helicopter lights. The arrows, the chase, the fresh paint. It wasn't a prank. It was a business. A sick, quiet business of lost souls. But yeah, I didn't share this with Elena. I just stared at the card. The silence in the room was heavy, like the silence in the woods. Then I heard it. From outside the motel room door, footsteps on the gravel. Slow, deliberate, crunch, crunch. Someone walking up to our door and stopping. So anyway, back in the summer of 2008, me and my buddies Jeff and Tony decided to take my old Ford Explorer out into the woods. You know, just one of those aimless drives, windows down, iPod Nano playing some grungy playlists. We turned off the main road onto this overgrown trail, branches scraping the paint, and I remember the rustle of dry leaves under the tires. We weren't even sure where we were going. Then, through the trees, we spotted this ancient stone well. It looked like something from a pioneer story, moss all over the stones. I mean, we just had to check it out. We parked and peered over the edge. The water down there looked so clear, so cold, you could see every pebble at the bottom. We figured it was just a natural spring, maybe high in minerals, you know, like those fancy bottled waters. Jeff dropped a tin cup on a rope, and we all took turns gulping it down. I noticed right away this weird metallic aftertaste, almost like sucking on a penny, but I didn't think much of it. I didn't know then that the clean, cold water we gulped down was already turning our blood into a toxic sludge. We filled up our flasks and joked about finding the perfect country well. The sun was setting, throwing long shadows, and the woods had that quiet, almost sacred feel. It was one of those moments you look back on and think life was simple, you know? But yeah, even as we drove back, laughing, there was a tiny knot in my stomach. Something about that taste. I told myself it was nothing. Probably just spring water with a high mineral content. I mean, that's what it had to be, right? We stopped for Coors Light at a gas station and grilled burgers later, forgetting the well almost entirely. I'd still taste that faint metallic whisper sometimes. I guess I just chose to ignore it. But yeah, like I said, we didn't think anything of it. We got back to my place, threw burgers on the grill, cracked open some Coors Lights. Jeff plugged in his iPod Nano, and we just chilled on the deck. I guess we all felt a little off, but nothing crazy. A slight sour burp maybe, but you know, after greasy food, totally normal. About 6 hours later, that's when things started to crack. I was lying on the couch half watching some baseball game when this cramp hit me out of nowhere, like someone twisting a knife right below my ribs. I sat up and heard Jeff in the bathroom groaning. Tony was curled on the floor, shivering. We all looked at each other, and I remember Jeff saying his stomach felt full of broken glass. Still, we laughed it off. Definitely the gas station burritos. We'd all eaten those questionable bean and cheese things from a 7-Eleven on the drive out. I mean, what else could it be? Just a bad batch. But yeah, the night went downhill fast. The sour smell of vomit started creeping from the bathroom. The cramps got so bad I couldn't stand straight. And then came the diarrhea. Painful, watery, just relentless. Every 30 minutes, the chills, the shakes. I remember this crack sound, maybe just the old house settling, but it sounded like ice snapping, and it made my skin crawl. I told myself it was nothing. But I caught Jeff's eye at one point, and I saw genuine fear, you know? He whispered that maybe we should call someone. I said, let's just wait till morning. I'll never forgive myself for that, because by midnight, the bathroom light stayed on, and the sour air in that hallway was thick enough to taste. I was sitting against the wall, knees pulled up, when I heard Jeff retching again, but this time different. Coughing, choking. I dragged myself over and pushed the door open. He was slumped against the tub, pale as a sheet, and in the toilet bowl, streaks of something dark. I didn't want to believe it was blood. I guess I just thought it was a bug, you know? Something we ate. But deep down, I knew we were in trouble. And then Jeff just went down. I mean, 1 second he's groaning against the tub, next he's on the floor, eyes rolled back. I swear my heart stopped. Tony was too weak to move, so I scrambled for my phone. My old Nokia 3310, you know, the brick kind. Dialed 911, and I don't even remember what I said. I was shouting something about blood and our friend not breathing. The next thing I hear footsteps, heavy, fast. Two paramedics burst in with this Dodge ambulance waiting outside, red lights flashing through the windows. The metallic smell in that bathroom, God, it was everywhere. Old copper, pennies, like the well water, but stronger. They strapped Jeff onto a gurney, and I remember one of them asking what we'd eaten. I told them about the burritos and the well water, just rambling. They loaded all three of us into the back. I kept thinking, maybe it's E. coli from undercooked meat, you know? That happens. It's common. It's not. It can't be anything else. In the ambulance, I was shaking so bad I bit my tongue. Jeff wasn't moving. Tony was whimpering, and I could hear every ragged breath he took. The siren wailed and the paramedic kept checking Jeff's pulse, his own footsteps heavy on the metal floor. I remember thinking, this is just a bad night. We'll all laugh about it tomorrow. But my body knew otherwise. My joints ached like I'd been beaten, and every time I closed my eyes, I'd taste that metallic whisper from the well. I tried to push it away. I really tried. At the ER, they wheeled Jeff straight in. The lights were so bright, and the antiseptic burned my nose. But underneath it all, I could still smell that sour, iron tang from my own sweat. A doctor shouted something about fever spiking. Jeff's temp over 104. They pulled curtains and I couldn't see him anymore. That's when the fear really got its claws in me, you know? Not the casual kind of scared, the kind that sits in your chest and doesn't leave, because it wasn't just Jeff. I looked at Tony and his lips were pale, and I realized we were all sinking. Whatever was in that water, it wasn't done with us. So there we were in the ER, lights too bright, antiseptic stinging my nose, machines beeping somewhere behind a curtain. I was slumped in a plastic chair, IV in my arm still shaking. They'd wheeled Jeff off, and Tony was on a gurney nearby, pale and barely conscious. The nurses were running, shouting things I couldn't understand. I felt useless, alone in that chaos, you know, just staring at the floor. And then, out of nowhere, a memory hit me. You know those stories your parents tell to keep you out of the woods? Well, I remembered one. I must have been 7 or 8, and my dad mentioned a chemical dump in the forest back in the 80s. Some company paid off locals to bury barrels of waste out there. There was even an article in the local paper from 1987 warning people to stay away from certain stream beds. I'd completely forgotten about it until that very moment, hooked to a drip, listening to the beeping of monitors. I flagged down a nurse. I told her, voice cracking, about the well, about that old dump. She hesitated, then scribbled something on a chart. Maybe it's a different part of the woods, I thought. Coincidence. Has to be, right? What were the odds? But she called the doctor, and I heard them mention heavy metals. That word hit me like a brick. The past just washed over me, that sour guilt mixing with the antiseptic in the air. They drew more blood, and a toxicology screen was ordered. I just sat there hollow, listening to Jeff's distant beeping monitor. I didn't want to believe it was our well. The silence in that little consultation room was the loudest thing I've ever heard. A toxicologist, Dr. Hendricks, sat across from me. He had a clipboard with a CDC case report. He spoke slowly, like he knew the words would shatter me. Acute poisoning, arsenic and lead, levels beyond anything he'd seen outside an industrial accident. I just stared at him, and that metallic taste from the well rushed back into my mouth, phantom-like. How does a well just become poison? So the doctor said the spring had been leaching through that old dump site for decades. Rusted barrels, industrial solvents, heavy metals, all seeping into the groundwater. That crystal clear water we gulped was basically a chemical cocktail. Jeff was in a coma, full organ failure, kidney, liver, everything failing. Tony and I weren't much better. My numbers were through the roof. I felt my chest cave in. I kept thinking, maybe the lab mixed up vials. This has to be some kind of mistake. But no. Dr. Hendricks started us on chelation therapy, injecting stuff to pull the metals out. He said it might save us. But Jeff, it might already be too late. That metallic taste never left my tongue. It was guilt, pure, burning guilt. We led him there. We drank that water. And now the beeping I heard was for him, fighting for his life while I sat there answering questions. But yeah, day after day, I'd just sit there, waiting. Jeff was in the ICU, on a ventilator. That rhythmic hiss and push of the machine was the only sign he was still alive. Tubes everywhere, dialysis cleaning his blood because his kidneys were gone. Sterile smell, soap and plastic, and cold air. Me and Tony would take turns, driving his mom's Toyota Camry to the hospital every evening, just to press our hands against the glass. I'd watch the numbers on the monitor and pray they didn't drop. The days blurred into weeks. I was slowly recovering, the chelation pulling some of the poison out. But I was still so weak. Tony too. But we couldn't stay away. The guilt was a weight, like lead in my own bones. I kept replaying that moment by the well, the sun going down, the rusty clink of the tin cup. I'd tell myself if we'd just gone straight home, none of this would have happened. I kept bargaining with the past, but Jeff was still in there, fighting. The doctors said his liver might recover, but the kidneys, maybe never. I'd stand in that sterile hallway until the nurses sent us home, and then I'd go back to my apartment and stare at the ceiling, the rhythmic ventilator still haunting my ears. No relief, just waiting. Jeff survived, barely. A month in that coma, then another 2 in the hospital. But he came out different. Chronic kidney failure, a tremor in his hands that never went away. Tony and I got our own set of lifelong problems. Nerve damage, joint pain, constant monitoring. The EPA sealed that well in 2009, put up big yellow signs. Danger. Toxic waste. The whole area is off limits now. We got a settlement, but you can't put a price on your own body turning against you. And the doctors said the chelation got almost everything out, that we were safe. I wanted to believe that, but they can't get it all out, right? So every time I turn on the faucet, I freeze. I can't drink tap water without this paralyzing fear clawing up my throat. I only drink bottled now, and even then, sometimes I pause and smell it first. And at night, in the silence of my room, I'll wake up with that metallic taste in my mouth. Strong, like sucking on a penny. The doctors call it psychosomatic, phantom sensations from trauma. They tell me it's all in my head, but I know the truth. That poison is still in me, deep in my bones and my blood. It's a part of me now, and I'll taste it forever.